everyone, Kristina Werner here with another video for SimonsTheStamp.com. Today I'm going to be using the stamp set and the stencil that are included in the March 2022 card kit. This is the stamp set. It's a 6x8 stamp set with lots of little images on it. It's called Happy Days Ahead, and there are so many scene building elements in this stamp set that I thought I would do some scene building and also some no-line coloring for today's video. I'm going to be using the small cloud stencil as well. And I'm going to start out by getting my watercolor paper prepped. I'm using some Fabriano Artistico Extra White watercolor paper. And I'm stamping all of my scene in antique linen distress ink. When it comes to doing no-line watercoloring, I like to use antique linen distress ink because the line of the stamped image is very faint, it's very pale, and as I start painting over the top, those lines start to disappear. That's actually where you get the no-line name, is that it looks like there are no lines. So I've placed my bunny kind of in the center, more near the bottom of my watercolor paper. And then I'm stamping two of the kind of foliage or leaves and flowers images and grass images from the stamp set on either side. And then I'm planning to put the clouds right above, but I thought that space directly left of the bunny was the perfect spot to put a greeting. So I took the Happy Days Ahead grading, and I'm actually going to stamp it in black. I'm using VersaFine ONYX black ink, and I'm doing this because in the end, I wanted this grading to be there, and I wanted it to be black, and since this ink is waterproof, I thought, go ahead, let's just put it in now and do all the stamping all at once. So I stamped it twice to get a very, very solid image. And then now I'm going to take the negative images from the cloud stencil, and I'm going to kind of place it down onto my watercolor paper and trace around the edge with a pencil. For this step, you could also use the other half of the stencil. You could trace the inside of the shape, but I kind of liked being able to envision where the cloud would be and also how these two clouds would overlap. So I decided to use the negatives for the stencil images, just for this step in particular. Now I'm using the stencil as a shape guide for this. I'm actually not going to be inking on the stencil or anything like that. So like I said before, I'm doing no line watercoloring, and I really love to use distress ink for this, but you could use any medium that you can paint with. So any of the Simon inks, you can do a similar technique where you smush the ink pad and pick up the ink with a wet brush. You could use regular watercolor paints, anything like that, and it's really fun. There's also a way that you could do no-line coloring with markers or colored pencils. Really, you can do no-line coloring with any coloring medium. The trick is to just make sure you stamp your images in a very faint ink. So I'm adding a little blush to the bunny's cheeks with some worn lipstick. And then I'm going to speed up the video footage so you can see probably about 60% of all the coloring, but at a sped up speed. And for the bunny, my main colors that I used were Scattered Straw. That's the color I'm putting down now. And then for some shading on the bunny, I used a Vintage Photo. And I'm going to do a little more pink on the ears, and then I'll get to that Vintage Photo. But I really love the combination of Scattered Straw and Vintage Photo for critters. I think it gives such a nice, warm, kind of tan shade to everything, and just bringing in that Vintage Photo on the darker areas and on those lines really helps define the shape of the critter or the animal. So I'm making sure that I'm bringing in those darker colors right around the edges on the bunny's face and the body, and then I'm going to come in and make sure I get that shading right around the arms, really helping to define that area. And I'm purposely making sure I kind of go around that carrot that the bunny is holding so that I can paint that in different colors here in a minute. Adding more of that shading in, making sure I have a defined line around the bunny's face. And in particular, you notice I've got a little bit of a harsh water line up around his chin. I'm actually going to take a little bit of water on a brush and kind of soften that edge out. And that's how you kind of push that color out and it softens that harsh edge. Painting the carrot with a nice orange shade. And I'm actually going to use Vintage Photo to shade the 1/2 of that carrot as well. I used a Tombow Mono pen for the eyes and nose and mouth on the bunny. And then I grabbed some peeled paint and I used that for the top of the carrot. And I also used it for the initial painting on all of the grass around the bunny. So I'm just adding a little bit of that color at full strength and then getting my brush wet and spreading it out, just trying to get as much of this grass painted as possible. Peeled paint is sort of a great mid-tone green that's perfect for leaves and grass and kind of just that kind of spring green shade that we all love. So I started with peeled paint and I thought I might need to bring in a darker shade, but really it all looked so great. I decided to just leave it as is. I brought in some other colorful shades for the flowers, including a little bit of mustard seed for this daisy here. I put a little bit of that orange shade for some color difference and then used Vintage Photo on the center of the flower. I used seedless preserves for this purple shade for this tulip over on the side. And after I had all this done, it was time to work on the sky. Now remember, I have those clouds that are penciled in above. So how I'm going to paint the clouds is I'm going to go around the outer edge of each cloud and just add some blue shading, and that'll make the clouds look like they're white. So just painting around them and keeping the interior of the cloud shapes will help the sky look bright and cheerful because it has white fluffy clouds. So I believe I'm using some broken china. I think I used broken china for this. And I'm just going around all those edges on the clouds, making sure I fade it out. Now, the way I did this was I brought the color in mostly at full strength to kind of outline the edge. And then I got my brush wet and brought more water over to soften the edge out so it kind of fades out to nothing. So I also wanted to bring a little bit of that blue down toward the bunny, just so that it brings those clouds into the scene, because right now they're kind of looking just like they're floating above everything, which, and you know, truthfully, that's what clouds do. But I wanted them to be more incorporated into the scene. So bringing that a little bit of that blue down does that. So at this point, I'm done with all of my painting. So I just sped along the drying process with my heat tool. And then I wanted to put this cut down background. I cut it to be a little smaller than an A7 card. And I wanted to have a dark background for it. Initially, I thought maybe I would just use black cardstock. But then I remembered this pack of pattern paper from Vicky Boutin. The papers were included in a card kit a while back, and I loved the paper so much that I went back and bought the full pack of paper. And it just has some nice words on, some texture to that background. And that's how I finished up the card. I just popped up the watercolor scene on some foam tape and then adhered it to the card front. So that is the card for today. If you would like to pick up the stamp set and the stencil I use, you can get them separately or in the card kit over at simonstamp.com. Everything I've used today is linked down below in the video description and also over at the Simon Says Stamp blog. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in another video very soon.